Hello and welcome to BQ Prime. 5 Indian states are headed for elections in November. Mizoram on November 7th, Chhattisgarh on November 7th for its first phase and November 17th for its second phase. Madhya Pradesh on November 17th as well, Rajasthan on the 23rd of November and Telangana on November 30th. Counting in all 5 states will be held on December 3rd. Now, what do the economies of these election-bound states look like? And can political parties even fulfill some of the promises that have been made in their election manifestos? For this and a lot more, we have with us Paras Jasrai and Madan Sabnavis. Thank you so very much for taking time out for this conversation today. So I'll begin with you, Mr. Sabnavis. Could you give an overview of what is the economic state in these election-bound states?
Pallavi, if you look at these states, I think each and every state is positioned quite differently from the other. So if you look at these 5 states, I think Telangana is a relatively new state which was formed and is probably more progressive in terms of having a higher per capita income, in terms of the kind of development which has been brought about. Because traditionally it was a part of the state of Andhra Pradesh. So once it got bifurcated, Telangana was a part of that. If you look at states like Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, they were also combined at one point of time. So their bifurcation took place quite some time back. But if you look at their overall economies, I think they are quite distinct from that of Telangana. And if you look at Rajasthan, which was traditionally a part of the Bhimavi states, if you remember, they have made tremendous progress over the last couple of decades. So today, if you look at Rajasthan, it's also one of the major states when it comes to growing oilseeds. It's agriculturally speaking, it's a rich economy. The same thing holds also for Madhya Pradesh. Chhattisgarh to a certain extent, because they're also rich in things like growing rice. And Mizoram, of course, is in the northeast. I think it's a smaller state. So in terms of the size, they have certain advantages in terms of all the per capita numbers looking better. But at the same time, if you look at the overall level of development which has taken place, that would be tend to lag compared to states like Telangana. On the other hand, if you look at other indicators, like, for example, infrastructure, we looked at one indicator of power availability. It's substantially higher when you're talking of a state like Telangana compared to the other states, because it's a power surplus kind of state. So there are different kinds of states with different kinds of advantages. There are different kinds of challenges which are there for the states, and I think the way I would look at it is that whichever party comes to power has quite a big job cut out to make sure that you're able to bring the states to a higher level, so that there's more comparability, especially if you're comparing with the states which are not going for elections, states like Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, which are considered to be, in the economic sense, more progressive.
Okay, so in states like Madhya Pradesh, the Congress election manifesto, for instance, listed a universal health insurance cover for 25 lakh rupees, farm loan waivers up to 2 lakh rupees, and unemployment allowance. Likewise, in case of Chhattisgarh, we saw both the BJP and the Congress parties trying to outdo each other with promises made in the election manifesto. What I do want to ask both of you is what does the state, what is the capacity of these states at this point, and can these promises even be fulfilled even if the party was to come to power? So we'll start with Madhya Pradesh. Paras, what are your thoughts? What are state finances like, and is there enough bandwidth to be able to actually enable some of these promises made in the manifesto?
Yeah, so Madhya Pradesh, if you see the debt of Madhya Pradesh, there are two basically indicators to judge the fiscal capacity of the state. First is the debt. And if you look at the debt profile of Madhya Pradesh, then definitely amongst all states, Rajasthan has a very weaker debt profile. The leverage of the state currently is about 36% of GSDP, which is quite high for the state. But if you look for a state like Madhya Pradesh, so their debt is though has grown over the period of time, but now it's around 28 to 30% of GSDP. So they do have, if you compare with the state like Rajasthan, some bit of fiscal space in terms of doing all the new expenditure. But in terms of the recent times, we have seen that especially after COVID, there has been a lot of push in capex by the state, and we had looked at the numbers for the first half of this fiscal as well. So in terms of the quality of the public expenditure right now, Madhya Pradesh is amongst the best states which is having the best quality of public expenditure right now. If you see in the first half of fiscal year 24, it's spending around 22 rupees for every 100 rupees of expenditure it's doing overall. 22 rupees is like allocated towards capex, and that is the best and much better than a state like Rajasthan. Though they are also doing the quality of expenditure has improved compared to the last few couple of years, but then Madhya Pradesh has in the recent past, especially after COVID, they have done much more capex than what has been the trend that we have been witnessing across the other states. So fiscally speaking, Madhya Pradesh does look, though the fiscal deficit also has been around 4%, above 3% on an average since FY20. But that's not a bad thing, because mostly it is channeled towards capital expenditure, which helps build the overall long-term productive capacity of the state, and which is better for the overall GSDP growth as well. But if you look for a state like Rajasthan, their fiscal deficit has been around 3.8 to 4% of GSDP, and that's adding to the overall debt as well for the state. So now, currently where they are, it's almost around 37% of GSDP, the overall debt they have, and that is quite high. And if you compare with the prudential levels, which is suggested by the 15th Finance Commission as well, so they are quite high for, if you compare the other states, sort of in the profile of West Bengal or Punjab, where the debt profile is quite high. I mean, yeah, and they are more fiscally vulnerable as well.
All right. So, Mr. Sabnavis, Mr. Jasrai pointed out, while Madhya Pradesh does seem to relatively rank better, Rajasthan, of course, remains a point of concern. We've already seen the state government enact a couple of laws meant for improving social security in the state in its last budget. Alongside that, the state has also made a return to the old pension scheme system. Now, a lot of these aspects, even if the state can cope in the near term, appear to be red flags from a slightly longer perspective. What is your take on Rajasthan as well as Madhya Pradesh?
Yeah, actually, I think we need to distinguish articulation from action. So when you're looking at the manifestos of any party, I think they always tend to talk about nice things, especially from the point of view of social welfare, because they're trying to reach out to the electorate. You're trying to tell everyone that the government is, that this party is there for you. You vote me to power, and I will be able to deliver certain things to you. But once you're in power, we realize that states do not actually meet all the sort of promises which they have made. Even for something like, say, for example, loan waivers, I think states keep making a lot of announcements at the time of the manifesto. Even once they come to power, they make an announcement saying that they're going to go ahead with a loan waiver. But at the end of the day, if you look at the actual amount of money which is spent by writing off loans, it's very, very minimal. It's not more than 10 to 20% of the promise, because there are lots of conditions which are put by the government to make sure that there is no moral hazard or case of people just coming and claiming the benefit when nothing is really gone wrong. Or there are lots of administrative processes which are brought in. So we've heard of farmers actually complaining, not exactly in the states which you're talking of, but in Maharashtra, for example, when we had a 50,000 crores worth of loan waiver scheme which was announced, not more than around 20-25% actually materialized, and very few farmers actually did qualify for it. So, and I think the main reason for this is that the FRBM rules lay down as to what could be your level of fiscal deficit. So if I have a 3%, 3.5%, 4%, whatever is the number which I have, I mean, that becomes sacrosanct for states. You cannot really borrow more in order to meet these expenditures. So I think next what the governments do, or rather what the parties do once they come to power, is you see what is the best that you can do of it. Very often there are old schemes which already exist, which are renamed, so that it gives you the appearance that there is a new scheme coming in. Like when you're talking of something like social welfare schemes, schemes, they're talking of employment schemes, subsidies being given. These are things which have already been in existence. So there will be a kind of minor tweaking which is done. You increase maybe something on food side, reduce something else on irrigation, reduce something on power, and that's how they do make sure that the fiscal balances don't go out of order. So I think the advantage which we have had of FRBM is that it ensures that all states work within those confines of the number which is there. Now, this said, I think the problem is that in case you're going to spend more on these welfare measures, there will be less which is left for capital expenditure. And that's another trend which we have seen. If you talk about in Madhya Pradesh, you talk about Rajasthan, you talk about Chhattisgarh, Telangana, I think these are the same problems which you have. That the amount, your ability to spend on capital expenditure definitely diminishes. But that may not really show off in a very big way, because if I cut it down around 5 to 10% a year and reallocate those resources for meeting some of the promises which are made, you're able to generally balance the budget, and the numbers do not really show off in that very big way. But we saw, for example, last year, a number of states have actually fallen short of the capital expenditure targets. And looking at it in this year, probably there may be a repetition of this kind of story, especially for these states, depending upon what their commitment is to the promises which they made at the time of the elections.
Sure. All right. Paras, depending on the current state of finances, would it be fair to say that while Rajasthan, among the major states, seems to be most fiscally vulnerable, Madhya Pradesh then, while Telangana seems to be relatively better placed? Is that sort of the right way to look at it in terms of fiscal deficit, in terms of outstanding liabilities of these state governments?
Yeah, Pallavi, that's correct broadly. Yes, if you, as I mentioned about the fiscal profile of Madhya Pradesh, so they are much better placed. And if you look at Telangana, their debt is around 25 or 24% of GSDP. So they are also like in terms of other states. If you compare with Rajasthan, they are better placed in terms of this. And the state also has been doing quite a bit of developmental expenditure, and especially in the capex side, they also have been like doing quite a bit. And in the first half of this fiscal, so far they have like spent about 19 rupees for capital outlay for every 100 rupees they have expended on overall expenditure. So that's like right next to Madhya Pradesh in terms of the quality of public expenditure. And if you look at the different capital expenditure, also the kind of capital expenditure that they're doing, then the good thing to note about Madhya Pradesh is that now a higher amount of share is like given towards social sector, which is your education, health, urban development. So that is very a positive thing, uh, given the deficit that the state is having in terms of the human development indicators as well. So that is one point in terms of where the overall capital expenditure is also going for Madhya Pradesh. And but Rajasthan definitely has fair bit of problem in terms of their committed expenditure as well, which basically includes the salaries, pensions, and interest payments. So as your debt is like going higher, so overall your debt servicing, which is your interest payments, also keeps on ballooning. And there, if you see currently for Rajasthan, about 14 rupees for every 100 rupees the state is generating in terms of revenue is going towards interest payments only. So that is quite high if you compare with all the mentioned states like Chhattisgarh, Telangana, or Madhya Pradesh. So yeah, that's there.
So in case of Rajasthan, are we also seeing slower capex spend?
This year they have done a fair bit of capex compared to last year. We saw that in terms of the quality of expenditure, now they are spending about 11 rupees for every 100 rupees of expenditure. So they are doing, so that is a positive thing. And if you look at their overall capital expenditure as well, then particularly in this year, what we have seen is that around the state is doing around 138 billion of capex in this first half of this fiscal, and that is like quite high if you compare with the 83 billion that was done the same period last year. So the focus right now is definitely there towards capex. Also, there is a fair bit of support that is being given from the government side as well, in whether in terms of the interest-free capex loans or the advanced release of the tax devolution installment, and the own revenues also are doing fairly good in terms of this year. So that is also helping the state in terms of focusing more, slightly more on capex compared to last couple of years.
Okay. Mr. Sabnavis, one last question. So it's a two-part question actually. So over the weekend, we did see the PM announce the extension of the food scheme. So far, whatever we have seen in terms of election promises being made, irrespective of whether they materialize or not, on an aggregate, what is the overarching picture in terms of the messaging? Are we seeing and are likely to see more populist measures as we inch closer to the general elections? And what is the impact of the free food scheme expected to be on the government finances over the next 5
Okay,
years?
the way I look at it, Pallavi, is that for a country which has 800 million people who are needy, we don't call them poor, but we call it needy. I think that's what has been mentioned by the government, that you're providing this scheme of free food for the next 5 years. I think it's a responsibility of the government to make this kind of a provision. Because notwithstanding the fact that we've had quarrels with the World Hunger Report or the index which came out, where we said that there was a bias in terms of presentation of data. But here today, when we have seen that right from the time when we had the pandemic, that is the lockdown was introduced, and we had seen that around 800 million people were provided support by the government. I think it becomes a kind of a responsibility for the government to continue with such kind of schemes. Now, announcing it for the next 5 years may make it look as if you're keeping the elections in mind. But to my mind, I think even earlier when we had the PDS scheme, which was running, which probably charged the consumer a very small amount, but it didn't really make a very big difference, because when you make it, instead of charging 2 or 3 rupees, you suddenly start saying it's free of cost. There is, of course, a little kind of an extra cost which is attached to this kind of subsidy which is being given. But this 2 lakh crores which the government is spending on food subsidy, to my mind, is something which can be very easily absorbed in the budget. And I think it's a responsibility of the government to make sure that this basic need is provided to all the people. And given the fact that we're going to continue for the next 5 years, I think the only increase in cost which will be there will be based on whatever the MSP is. Because assuming that the handling costs or the transportation costs or other costs which are accompanying costs do not really change significantly, I think the way in which this number is going to move up will be commensurate with the increase which we see in the MSPs and the price at which the FCI is procuring from the farmers. So I don't really see any kind of a major threat as such to the budget, assuming that the budget normally grows, the size of the budget grows by around 8 to 10% every year. I think an increase of around 4 to 5%, which we may see on account of the food subsidy, is something which is required, and I think it can be well absorbed in the budgetary numbers.
Okay. All right, Mr. Jasrai and Mr. Sabnavis, thank you so very much. This was a most insightful conversation. Stay tuned to BQ Prime for our continuing updates on the economy and to also track how the elections evolve.
I wish everyone at BQ Prime a very happy Diwali and very festive season ahead. And thank you very much for having me here. It has been a pleasure to be here with you.